What's up? What's going on? What's good? This particular conversation, you see the title. Porter wants Crawford. Crawford wants Spence. Pacquiao just chilling. Is Thurman in the mix? Just want to talk about the 147-pound division. Here we are near the close of the year 2020, and we've had a few fights within the top area of the 147-pound division, right? And we are going through the last couple of weeks here, and one of the big topics that has come up is in reference to two of the guys that are around or at the top five in the welterweight division. And we're talking about Terrence Crawford, the WBO welterweight champion, and Shawn Porter, the former IBF world champion, the former WBC world champion. Now, Shawn Porter is a top contender on multiple rankings within the sanctioning bodies, including the WBC and the WBO. And of course, over the past couple weeks, especially after the Errol Spence Danny Garcia fight, Shawn Porter was asked about who he would be pursuing given his status on the WBC and WBO rankings. And at that time, he said that he is more interested in a fight with Terrence Crawford, given that we've already seen Shawn Porter against Errol Spence already. Okay? So, following that has been the talk in reference to Terrence Crawford and possible next opponent for Terrence Crawford going into 2021. And, you know, it's kind of like carried over, and a lot of people are kind of like talking about it now. It was one fight that I mentioned earlier this year that I thought that Terrence Crawford should have went ahead with that bout, you know, pretty much this year. I know that you had, like I said, people talking about Terrence Crawford pursuing Errol Spence. They're in the 147-pound division. But given his status with Top Rank, those fights, you know, are kind of limited in a sense. I mean, we could, you know, break that down a little bit later because, of course, you have, you know, people talked about, oh, Spence is doing this, he's sidestepping Crawford, he doesn't want to fight him and all this and that. But that's for, you know, a whole nother thing here. We're just going to go through part of it now, but in depth probably a little bit later on. So going back to this thing with Shawn Porter and Terrence Crawford, right? The topic has been rehashed, given that Shawn Porter could possibly be the WBO mandatory challenger. He is number one contender. I haven't seen where he's been officially named as the mandatory challenger to the WBO welterweight title. But if he is, then maybe, you know, conversations about that fight could resurface. Now, the thing about it is that Shawn Porter has addressed this on multiple occasions. He's brought it up on his podcast, the Porterweight podcast, and also he brought it up with Brian Custer. Okay, and this, you know, podcast with or interview with Brian Custer happened a couple of weeks ago, and you know, Shawn Porter talked about the situation or history, so to speak, between him and Terrence Crawford. And I want to see if I could get, you know, part of that conversation on here. This is from the Last Stand podcast with Brian Custer when he was with Shawn Porter, and it took place on December 10th, which was, you know, 5 days after you had Errol Spence and Danny Garcia. So let me break this down here. Let me see if I can get it.
You know, I thought it was interesting talking with Terrence, and he said, listen, and this was Terrence Crawford talking, it's funny how guys like Thurman are calling me out when all those guys had the belts. None of them wanted to fight me. But then all of a sudden, they wanted to keep those belts on the PB side of the street. He goes, now you look at some of these guys, he says, whether it's Porter, whether it's Thurman, he goes, none of these guys have the belts anymore. And all of a sudden, my WBO belt has become relevant. They had no interest in fighting me in the past. Now they want to fight me. What's your response to that?
I spoke on this in my last episode of the Welterweight podcast, which drops every Tuesday. Last episode, I made it clear. Prior to him fighting Jose Benavidez, I never saw myself fighting him. So, leading up to Jose Benavidez, when he first moved to the welterweight division, I talked to him right before he moved to the division. I said, yo, you really moving up? He said, yeah. I said, man, I was like, what are you moving up for? He said, man, I done cleaned out the division. They want me to stay at 140, but I want to move up. I looked at it, I said, so we going to fight? He said, man, I want the same guy you want. I said, who is that? He's like, Danny Garcia. At that time, I hadn't fought Danny. So when he moved up to the welterweight division, I was just like scratching my head, like I never saw myself fighting this guy, man. I'm not gonna fight him. He fights Jose Benavidez, and I'm sitting there by myself watching the fight. And when he knocked out Jose, I sat back. I was like, damn, I might have to fight this dude.
Hey.
Like and then I just these thoughts. I'm like, he is that good. He's that exciting to watch. Damn, I might have to fight this dude. Now I was like, nah, we'll talk. Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't, you know? But since he fought Jose Benavidez, and since the talks of him fighting Errol Spence Jr. started to happen, it was him and Errol. Never cared. That's y'all thing. Y'all do y'all thing. But after my fight with Errol Spence Jr., everybody's saying, oh, maybe the fight with Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter would be good. Then Errol Spence gets into his accident, and now everybody's like, we don't want to see that fight anymore. We want Terrence and Sean. And so I start hearing Terrence and Sean, and I'm like, damn, man, all right, I'll fight him. If nobody else will, I'll fight him. You know, with me, it's 100% the competitive spirit that I have and the willingness to fight someone who a lot of people feel he's feared, and a lot of people don't want to fight him.
And there you go. That's, a portion of that interview with Sean Porter on the Last Stand podcast with Brian Custer. So he talks about the timeline where Terrence Crawford, he had been the undisputed super lightweight champion of the world. He had that knockout over Julius Ndongo to become the undisputed champion at 140 pounds. Then he moves up. And when he moves up, he goes ahead and he fights Jeff Horn for the WBO welterweight championship. And then he has that first defense. And that was, pretty much around October of 2018. And the thing about it is that in between that time, you had the situation with the WBC belt being vacated because Keith Thurman, who was the unified champion WBC and WBA, had been injured. So the first belt that was vacated was, the WBC belt. Technically, he kept the WBA belt. So when he came back, Thurman, that is, he had the WBA title. And we know what happened with that, and we'll revisit it. So, Porter talks about this whole thing here, with Terrence Crawford. And he's like, yo, this may be a possibility. I may, end up fighting Terrence Crawford. Didn't really consider it, given that they're friends and all of that. But he's like, yo, maybe this possibly could happen. Now, like you said, he fought Benavidez, Crawford did, and, he beat Benavidez there, and that was in October. And that was a month after you had Sean Porter beat Danny Garcia for the WBC belt. So, at the time, Sean Porter was WBC champion. You had Terrence Crawford, who won the WBO belt, had that first defense against Benavidez. And now, fast forward, you had Sean Porter fight Errol Spence, lose to Errol Spence, IBF, and now WBC welterweight champ. So, Porter, loses the belts and whatnot, but that kind of like was a response to, what Terrence Crawford was saying. Like, everybody, that's stepping up to fight me now don't have a belt. But the thing about it is that Porter was like, look, hey, we could, make something shake or whatever it is. It didn't matter what time or, what date it could have happened. He would be open to it. He's still open to it. And in that conversation that he had with Brian Custer, he was talking about how when him and Crawford were talking in July, right, that there was an instance where you could probably, have that fight happen. But Crawford told him that there was something big that, he was working on. So he kind of felt like, Porter that is, he kind of felt that, Crawford was working on something big, and that it was outside of this whole thing with Kell Brook. Now, Crawford has his fight with Kell Brook in November, and he gets the knockout, pretty much stop his victory, right? And now, like I said, you have Terrence Crawford as the top contender there with the WBO, and it's possible that he is mentioned as a potential opponent. Now, we've heard from Bob Arum, looks like, when it comes to a potential fight between Terrence Crawford and Sean Porter for the WBO welterweight title. And Bob Arum says, listen, I'm not going to have this guy, Sean Porter, fighting Terrence Crawford. If he wants to fight Terrence Crawford, he's going to have to take $1 million. Hey, I know that he had more than that fighting Errol Spence, but listen, he's not going to have any type of money like that fighting Terrence Crawford. I've already said that I'm losing money with Terrence Crawford. Why would I want to spend any more money for Terrence Crawford when he's going to have another fight? Hey, if it happens in October of 2021 that he wants to leave, then he could go ahead and leave. I don't care. Whatever it is, right? But that's kind of funny that, seems like it's easily dismissed by Bob Arum. Now, if the WBO invokes that mandatory challenger thing and announces it and says that, hey, you got, 90 days or 60 days to negotiate, or it goes to a purse bid, and their purse bid split is 75-25 towards the champion. Now, that would be really interesting if you had a fight like that, be on purse bid. Particularly if it does go to purse bid and PBC or a representative of PBC ends up winning the purse bid. That would be very interesting, given that Terrence Crawford is, still under contract with Top Rank. Okay? Now, we talked about the whole thing, like you said, Crawford wants Errol Spence or whatever it is and whatnot. So Terrence Crawford, of course, he showed up, over in Dallas at AT&T Stadium to watch Errol Spence against Nanny Garcia. Now, funny thing is, here we are a couple weeks later, and a lot of people are kind of like saying that, oh yeah, Terrence Crawford really wants Errol Spence, but there was something from the trainer and manager of Terrence Crawford, and that is Brian Bomac McIntyre, yes, who has been a guest on the podcast. But Brian Bomac McIntyre said, hey, yeah, we could, make these fights happen between, Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence, but it has to be 50-50. He also said that a fight between Terrence Crawford and Manny Pacquiao, 50-50. Like, people want to talk about the whole thing about, Errol Spence talk about 60-40 or 70-30 when he made those comments while he was there attending the Canelo Callum Smith fight. But you heard what Coach Bomack said, okay? Now that 60-40, that was, already proposed or put up there for weeks. 70-30 just, came out of the blue when when Errol Spence was interviewed. So that, I guess it ain't really going that, very far. And we've seen the tweet from Terrence Crawford claiming that, hey, it's not on me. He said that I'm done with it. Okay? But, it remains to be seen what ends up happening, since he seems like Terrence Crawford is dismissing a possible fight between him and Errol Spence happening anytime soon. Now, you got the whole thing with that 60-40, 50-50 back and forth between Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. But now we have another fighter that hasn't really been talked about that much as far as who is going to be his next opponent, and that is Manny Pacquiao. Now, Manny Pacquiao does hold the WBA title at 147 pounds. And, he hasn't fought since he got that WBA title from Keith Thurman in July 2019. There was suggestions about who his next opponent would have been over the course of the year. But, with the whole thing with this coronavirus stuff shut down, he has not been able to step into the ring. So, there was some comments made by, of course, Bob Arum, going back to what I was saying in the conversation about Terrence Crawford working on something big when Crawford had that conversation with Sean Porter in July. So after the Crawford-Brook fight, Bob Arum was saying that, hey, we had something worked out. We were going to work something out with Terrence Crawford fighting Manny Pacquiao over in Saudi Arabia, but because of the shutdown, it couldn't happen. So in 2021, we're going to revisit it, right? All right. So we're going to see about if that's for real or not with Terrence Crawford and Manny Pacquiao. But Manny Pacquiao did make some comments after the Errol Spence Danny Garcia fight, giving props to Errol Spence in that there could have been a possible chance that you could have Pacquiao and Errol Spence in a unification fight. Now, Errol Spence did kind of mention that Manny Pacquiao was going to be part of his plans a couple years ago when he talked to Terrence Crawford. Said, hey, I'm going to fight Mikey Garcia, I'm going to fight Sean Porter, I'm going to fight Keith Thurman, I'm going to fight Manny Pacquiao. He's already fought 2 of those 4 fighters. Manny Pacquiao is now the guy that holds the WBA title. So if you have Errol Spence there going up against Manny Pacquiao, unification fight, Errol Spence wins, he has 3 of the 4 titles. Okay? So that would give him even more leverage if there was going to be a fight negotiated between him and Terrence Crawford. Right? So I'm looking at what's going to happen next with Manny Pacquiao because, hey, he hasn't fought in over a year. In 2019, he fought twice. He fought Adrian Broner in January and then fought Keith Thurman in July. So maybe he has something in the works where he could fight in January or February of next year. It just depends on who he's going to fight. Now, he could be fighting twice. That was a possibility that he said that he could be fighting twice in 2021. So we would like to see what that would basically be. Now, if he fights earlier or those first couple of months in 2021, then I don't see either Errol Spence or Terrence Crawford as his opponent. It'll be someone outside of that. So I'm thinking that he may be considering having a fight with Mikey Garcia or something like that. But we will see how that works. Now, yeah, Keith Thurman, right? Mr. Don't Duck Me Son, Mr. Get Back Here, Mr. Anybody, kid, come get some, Mr. One Time and all that. Former unified champion. Did have his loss to Manny Pacquiao. Has also, basically been chilling since that particular fight. Now, he has mentioned that he would be interested in a fight with your Dennis Ugas. But given that he is a former world champion, think of your Dennis Ugas fight. I don't think that's like a high chance that fight's going to happen. So he may end up fighting somebody else. I don't think it will be like a rematch with Danny Garcia or anything like that. But if he doesn't fight your Dennis Ugas, then he may want to, pursue a rematch with, Manny Pacquiao or whatever it is. So I feel like, with Keith Thurman, I think he's still a factor there in the welterweight division. Like I said, he's defeated Sean Porter. He's defeated Danny Garcia. So his name can't be left out of the mix there within the top guys in the welterweight division, because everybody else is kind of like talking about each other. Like I said, you got, Sean Porter there talking about fighting Terrence Crawford. You have Terrence Crawford talking about fighting Errol Spence. You have Errol Spence, talking about fighting Manny Pacquiao. But what about Keith Thurman? So that's the whole situation that we have right now going into 2021 with the welterweight division. All right. Share your thoughts on what may happen in 2021 with any of those 5 fighters. And be sure to just catch videos here on the Boxing Source YouTube channel and also catch the podcast that's live on Sunday nights. All right. But it's also available on iTunes. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and you'll be able to get all the episodes there. On that note, folks, I'm out. Peace.